In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, April 4th. Korea's consumer price index rose 4.2% in March on year to mark its slowest rise in 12 months amid weaker global oil prices. And Busan is hosting the International Exposition delegation for an on-site inspection to assess the city's bid for the 2030 World Expo. BTS member Jimin's latest single, Like Crazy, debuted at #1 on this week's Hot 100 chart, marking a historic milestone for K-pop. We start on the local front this afternoon. Consumer prices accelerated, albeit at their slowest pace in a year in March. Our trade correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korea's inflation growth eased in March to its lowest level in 12 months. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Tuesday, the Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, jumped 4.2% on year last month. That's 0.6 percentage points lower than the month before. The growth peaked last July but has started to decline since then. The eased March figure was mainly driven by lower prices of petroleum products, which plunged 14.2% from a year earlier, marking another on-year decrease after also dropping in February. That's the largest decline since November 2020, when prices fell 14.9% on year. Meanwhile, prices of agricultural, fisheries, and livestock products rose by 3% on year, higher than the previous month. Prices of agricultural products rose by 4.7% due to skyrocketing vegetable prices. Utility fees, including electricity, gas, and water, again soared by 28.4% on year, hitting an all-time high figure. Price growth for processed food softened from the previous month with a growth of 9.1%. Statistics Korea, however, is forecasting that lower-priced petroleum products may not last, considering a recent announcement by the OPEC Plus with the bloc saying oil production will be cut.
Global oil prices always have a significant impact on the government's outlook regarding prices. Recently, there was an international oil production cut, which is expected to primarily affect the prices of petroleum products and other related areas.
Also on Tuesday, the Bank of Korea held a meeting regarding consumer price rises. A central bank official says the growth of consumer prices will continue to show a downward trend due to the base effect of last year's increase. Core consumer prices without volatile food and energy prices are also expected to see smaller increases, albeit at a slower pace than consumer prices. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, on the local political front, President Yoon has vetoed a bill that requires the government to purchase surplus rice, claiming the bill will only fuel overproduction and negatively affect market price. At a cabinet meeting on this Tuesday, President called for more talks over the Grain Management Act, adding that the bill was pushed through in the absence of in-depth discussions. Now, last month, the opposition-led National Assembly passed the bill which calls on the government to buy surplus rice if demand falls short of production by 3 to 5%, or if prices fall by 5 to 8% or more from the year prior. Now, this is the first time President has exercised his veto power and the first time that the executive right was used in 7 years. Global oil prices tumbled more than 6% on Monday in sharp response to planned production cuts by OPEC members and its allies. Our Choi Min-jung reports.
Oil prices jumped on Monday, the day after OPEC Plus nations announced surprise production cuts of more than 1 million barrels a day on fears of weakening demand. International oil benchmark Brent crude jumped by more than $5 or 6.3% to almost $85 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude also surged by 6.3% to a little over $80 a barrel after rising to a 2-month high during the session. Members of OPEC Plus, comprising of major oil exporting countries and Russia, shook the market with its decision to lower its production target by another 1.16 million barrels per day. This brings the total amount of cuts by the alliance to over 3 million barrels per day, combined with the 2 million barrel cut announced last October. Estimates show that this is around 3.7% of global demand. In response to the cuts, analysts at Goldman Sachs raised their year-end price forecast for Brent crude by $5 to $95 a barrel. It also hiked its forecast for the end of 2024 to $100 a barrel. Experts say this could eventually prompt more aggressive interest rate hikes from central banks, pushing economies closer to a recession. Against this backdrop, the U.S. disagreed with the production cuts.
Well, look, we don't think that production cuts are advisable at this moment, given the market uncertainty, and we made that clear.
However, Washington's response was milder than in October, when cuts came amid soaring gas prices as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Jimin Hot, Arirang News.
Back here in Korea, the fight against fire continues nationwide amid the prolonged dry conditions and strong winds. Our Yoon has the latest.
On Sunday, more than 30 wildfires were reported to have broken out across South Korea. A quick and aggressive response from firefighters has contained most of them, but the level 3 wildfire in Hongseong, Suncheonman province remains ablaze for a third straight day. Some 19 helicopters and 1,784 personnel have been actively working to extinguish the fire, but are up against strong winds. Forest authorities are expected to add another 2,941 staff and 188 pieces of equipment on Tuesday. 2 other level 3 fires are being fought in Jeollanam-do province. One in Hampyeong County, where the fire is presumed to have started on a bee farm. Strong winds have caused the fire to spread to a forest area close by and has spread quickly due to the recent dry weather. Damage from this fire include 4 factories, 2 stables, and 2 greenhouses. 43 residents have been evacuated. The other level 3 fire in this province is in Suncheon County, where 89 residents have been evacuated so far. Forest authorities have reiterated that all efforts, from staff to equipment, will be distributed across the country as soon as possible. No casualties have been reported yet, and some relief may be in sight as the country should see nationwide rain Tuesday evening. Yoon, Arirang News.
Busan is ready to host the World Expo in 2030. Now, this is according to President Yoon Suk-yeol at the former presidential office of Cheongwade Monday evening during a banquet for the delegation from the International Bureau of Expositions. He went on to pledge that Busan would seek to become a global platform of solutions to universal challenges should the southern port city be granted the opportunity to host the World Expo. He further added that as a country, South Korea stands as tangible testimony of triumph over war and poverty to become an IT and cultural powerhouse. In response, the delegation reportedly made favorable note of the broad support for the expo, including the recent unanimous backing by members of the parliament. And the International Exposition delegation kicks off its on-site inspection of Busan today as the southern port city hopes to bring home the 2030 World Expo. My colleague Song Yoo-jin sat down with the Busan Mayor for more on his city's prospects.
The Bureau of International Expositions, or BIE, is starting its on-site inspection in Busan on Tuesday. It's time for Busan to show what it's got after kicking off its World Expo project 9 years ago. Busan Mayor Park Hyung-jun has been one of the bid's key players since he took office in 2021. Ahead of the BIE's visit to Busan, Arirang News had the chance to speak with the mayor himself. He says the excitement towards the expo is higher than ever.
All of us here in Busan are busily preparing for the inspection. We hope the BIE feels this expo fever when they arrive here. Throughout this expo week, 16 districts are holding 67 expo-related events. Wherever the BIE goes, our citizens will warmly welcome them.
As for specifically what the city has been focusing on, the mayor says it's universal values that the whole world can relate to.
The expo is not just an event, it's a festival that shows where humanity should be heading in the future. So we thought that showing our efforts to tackle climate change and going eco-friendly was important. We focused on cleaning up the city and making it greener.
Competing with the Italian capital Rome, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and Ukraine's Odessa is tough. But Mayor Park is confident that Busan has what it takes to win.
Busan is one of the most open-minded and inclusive cities in Korea. It was home to numerous war refugees during the Korean War, and this is where Korea's industrialization and democracy movement flourished. We are a global logistics hub, home to the world's second-largest transshipment port. Our strengths in culture and tourism also prove why we should be the host city.
A united, supportive community is another advantage.
The competition to win the bid has heated up. I can say that South Korea is working as a more tightly knit team than any other candidate. What's noteworthy is that not only top-down but bottom-up, voluntary efforts from the public are spreading rapidly.
Mayor Park will be leading the charge throughout the BIE's 4-day visit to Busan. Not only the mayor, but the city as a whole will pull an all-out effort to bring their A-game.
Busan is good for World Expo, and Busan is ready. 화이팅!
송유진, 아리랑 뉴스.
BTS member Jimin's new single, Like Crazy, has topped the Billboard Hot 100 chart, making him the first K-pop solo artist to mark this milestone. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
BTS as a group may be on hiatus, but individually, members have been successfully launching their solo careers. This includes Jimin, who made history on Monday when his single Like Crazy from his album Face topped the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Jimin becomes the very first solo K-pop artist to top the Billboard Hot 100. According to Billboard, the song also topped the digital single sales chart with combined sales of 254,000 song downloads and CD singles. The chart-topping single was released on March 24th with the track coming from Jimin's debut solo album, which debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 album charts. Before Jimin, Psy reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 with his 2012 hit Gangnam Style. Like Crazy has a very 1970s sound with a synth-pop theme, and Jimin participated directly in the songwriting process. According to the artist himself, the song is about expressing the emotions of the moment when you turn away from reality to forget your scars. He added that his debut album was inspired by emotions felt during the 3+ years of the COVID-19 pandemic. Music critics say Jimin's success on the Billboard chart is further proof of BTS's global success, while adding that synth-pop's unique retro atmosphere and comfortable melodies are easily approachable for global music fans. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Up next, for those of you who have yet to indulge in these sights, sounds and scent of spring, the Suncheonman International Garden Expo is a beautiful option, especially for those of you in the southern part of the country. Our Jeju was there.
Living in the garden. The Suncheonman International Garden Expo is underway for the first time in 10 years. It opened on April 1st and will run through October 31st in the city of Suncheon, Jeollanam-do Province. Since the last time it was held, the city has grown the garden to more than 1 million square meters, which is more than 50 times bigger than Central Park in New York City. After 10 years of waiting, the new viewing points are also expected to capture the hearts of the visitors from all over the world. The garden is located near Suncheon Station, to which is connected by a 2.5-kilometer waterway called Dongcheon, where you can have the unique experience of taking a Korean-style gondola. Right when you enter, the air is filled with the fragrance of plants and flowers, which is relaxing for people exhausted by the pandemic. These include flowers grown locally such as pansies, anemones and tulips. There's a rose garden, a play garden for kids, and so much more enjoy.
There's a lot more here than I expected, and the weather is warm, so I'm having a lot of fun. The garden is decorated so beautifully, and it's very spacious.
You can also stay here overnight at a glamping-type facility called Shullange, which in the local dialect means peaceful rest. There are 35 individual tents, and each of them has its own concept with a river view. Tourists can chill in the garden and taste the fresh local foods of Suncheon. What else? There are also gardens representing other countries like the United States, France, and the Netherlands. It will be a great opportunity for foreign visitors to see how their country's gardens have been reinterpreted. On the west side of the expo is a garden in the style of a Korean palace, which provides a peaceful and quiet moment away from the city noise. The mayor of Suncheon said city officials took every effort to manage this expo successfully. In particular, he said that various efforts are being made to accommodate foreign visitors, with more than 2,000 volunteers dispatched to help with foreign languages.
There are numbers of volunteers who speak foreign languages fluently standing by. We will support people who visit in every way we can, using a variety of communication channels.
In addition, according to the official, they will find other ways to reuse this space in the future based on opinions collected from local residents. Jeju, Arirang News, Suncheon.
South Korea and the U.S. celebrate their 70th anniversary of diplomatic ties this year. And in light of this occasion, the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Korea says the two countries should look beyond their current short-term concerns to their potential long-term economic gains. Our finance correspondent Arirang covers his thoughts.
7 decades have passed since South Korea and the U.S. agreed to sign a mutual defense treaty in 1953. And these defense ties have now grown into a stronger partnership, widening to several fields other than security. That's especially true on the economic front. Seoul and Washington boast one of the largest trade relationships in the world, with bilateral investment and trade totaling $1.6 trillion annually. And some U.S. companies now see South Korea as an attractive market to do business in.
An interesting example is the New York Times. They actually moved their regional headquarters from Hong Kong to Korea. They actually looked at a lot of countries, but they chose Korea for all the reasons we spoke about. So I think that the Korean government's already making good progress, and as they start to tweak a few more things, this should be a real good place for many U.S. companies to operate in, invest in.
The chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea says that President Yoon and his so-called dream team have brought changes to the country's business environment.
Take a look at some of the things they've already fixed for us, including the flat tax for foreigners. That was a huge win. And I understand that President Yoon and his team are working on refining things like the Serious Accident Punishment Act, the 52-hour work week. Those are all very positive signs that he has come into office and has already made impact, which shows really outstanding possibilities for U.S. companies.
In fact, a flat income tax rate of 19% is offered to foreigners who work in South Korea. Starting this year, this tax benefit will be applied for 20 years, up from the original 5 years. Asked how the two countries should further cooperate, particularly in light of the recent Inflation Reduction Act and the U.S. CHIPS Act, the chairman says South Korea is going to remain an important partner of the U.S.
I think we should also look at not just short-term, but long-term. There could be some short-term challenges, but over the long term, I'm very confident that the two countries will achieve a win-win solution. And I think that's the way we ought to look at things.
He added South Korea should be even more aggressive about competing against other countries to make the country a regional headquarters, pledging that AmCham will also be part of that process. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the United States, former President Donald Trump landed in New York City on Monday, local time, ahead of his arraignment the next day. Trump is expected to turn himself into a Manhattan court on Tuesday, where he will be arrested and hear over 30 charges that have been laid against him. He is said to be meeting with his lawyers at Trump Tower in preparation for his court appearance. The impending arraignment comes after an unprecedented vote by a grand jury last Thursday to indict Trump. It makes him the first former U.S. president to ever face criminal charges. Trump has been under investigation over his alleged role in a 2016 hush money payment scheme that involved an adult film star, alongside allegations of mishandling classified documents. But Trump has denied any wrongdoing and says he is being politically targeted. Looking to NATO now, as the Intergovernmental Military Alliance is set to welcome Finland as its 31st member. The Nordic country's flag is set to be officially raised at NATO headquarters in Brussels on Tuesday local time in a ceremony. It falls on the same day as the organization's 74th founding anniversary. Finland's accession to NATO is one of the fastest in the organization's recent history. It means that NATO has doubled its frontier with Russia, as Finland shares a 1,300-kilometer border with its neighbor. Meanwhile, Sweden was meant to join Finland, but has been blocked as NATO members Turkey and Hungary failed to ratify its application over accusations of harboring terrorists and criticizing leadership. Both Finland and Sweden applied for NATO memberships last year, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, in space-related news, the first group of astronauts to chart a voyage around the moon since the Apollo missions over 50 years ago was announced on Monday. The four-member Artemis II team includes the first woman and the first African-American to be sent on such a mission. 3 of the members are from NASA and 1 is from the Canadian Space Agency. The Artemis II team is set to fly around the moon on a 10-day mission slated for 2024. It will see them travel as far as 370,000 kilometers from Earth, beyond the far side of the moon, before returning. Data collected during the mission will be used for the Artemis III mission, which aims to put humans on the moon's surface in 2025. And finally, marine scientists have broken 2 world records, first with the deepest ever video recording of a fish, and by making the deepest ever capture of a fish. In footage taken in September last year and released by Australian and Japanese scientists on Sunday, a snailfish can be seen at a record-breaking depth of 8,336 meters in deep trenches off Japan in the northern Pacific Ocean. It was recorded using unmanned marine landers equipped with cameras. The find beats the previous record of 7,703 meters. The team also broke the record for the world's deepest catch by capturing a juvenile snailfish at a depth of 8,022 meters. The achievements come as part of a long study into the world's deepest fish populations. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It has been an exceptionally warm and dry spring this year, and so far there have been 270 reports of wildfires around the country, which is twice as high as the same time last year. And at last, there's some very much hope for rain in the forecast. Now, rain starts from Jeju this afternoon, spreading to the south coast by late this afternoon, before expanding to the entire country tonight. Jeju will see more than 200 millimeters of rain, and the south coast will see up to 120 millimeters. Meanwhile, the capital and inland regions will see 10 to 60. It will rain heavier tomorrow with stronger winds, and this round of rain is forecast to linger into Thursday. It will stay warm and dry until that welcome rain falls, going 5 to 7 degrees higher than season norms. Skies remain cloudy all day with decent air quality. Temperatures will be on the cool side of normal after the rain goes away. And by Saturday morning, Seoul will wake up to a low of just 3 degrees Celsius. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
On that note, we end Tuesday's afternoon newscast. But do stay with us for our panel session on staying healthy this spring coming up next. Thank you for now.
바지 내 박자 위에서 내 무대 구판 이것도 구부리 요셔 정중히 모셔 판을 벌리자고 홍대 바닥에 박수들아 모여 로열한 불에 줘 나를 보러 빨리 와 접신한 게 딥뜨는 교성 지르면 난리나 힙합 판다 짝꿍이는 내꺼 이 동네 잔치상에 메뉴판 다 불가항력으로 메꿔 땀 냄새나 다 푹 젖었어 푹푹 지네 어디 창문 좀 열어줘 지루한 래퍼들은 다 물러서 이제 그분이 오셔 그분이 오셔 자꾸 타타타 우리 오셔 자꾸 하하하하 풍나는 자꾸 가가가 가짜들은 싹두 타타타 우리 오셔 자꾸 하하하하 풍나는 자꾸 타타타 우리 오셔 자꾸 하하하하 풍나는 자꾸 가가가 가짜들은 싹두 컷컷컷 싹두 래퍼들 구판 싹 다 마시는 게 내
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
춥지 않은가요? 처음 태어난 이별에서 사는 우리 손잡아요. 꽃 피는 동백섬에 부산항에 그리운 내 형제여 어쩌다 마주친 그대 모습에 내 마음을 빼앗겨버렸네 어쩌다 마주친 그대 두 눈이 내 마음을 싹잡아버렸네
A number of respiratory viruses are reportedly making their rounds this spring, and health pundits are calling on the public to practice good hygiene and to avoid crowded places. So what viruses are going around this spring? How severe are seasonal allergies during this time of the year? And what can be done to ensure health against fine dust? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Spring is in the air, and today we address efforts to ensure health against seasonal respiratory viruses and more. For this, I have Professor Chung Gi-seok from Hallym University, who's also the chair of the Committee for Disease Response here in the country. Professor Chung, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Kim Moon-kyu from Yonsei University with us. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Chung, first then, how do you explain the prevalence of respiratory viruses in the spring?
Well, the winter is most prevalent for respiratory viruses. And in summer, we don't have many patients with respiratory virus infection. And the spring is in between. So we still have influenza, especially type B, and other viruses as well. The reason why we have respiratory virus in the spring is because of dry air and some air pollution due to air atmosphere stagnation. And still we have a large fluctuation of temperature at midnight and then during daytime. So all that causes people prone to be infected by respiratory viruses. So I would recommend people to still pay attention to a respiratory viral infection.
Right, of course. Professor Kim, I hear human para-influenza viruses continue to affect our children here in the country this particular season. Could you tell us a bit about those symptoms and the severity of para-influenza viruses, as well as the treatment options available?
Yes, this is very common in children, and usually it takes about 2 to 6 days of incubation time to have symptoms, usually transmitted by air droplets and sometimes by close contact, and usually happens in springtime. Reinfection is also quite common, so if you had a para-influenza virus last year, you might have another one this year. Symptom is quite common as fever, cough, runny nose, sore throat, and sometimes you have poor appetite. And some children get very severe, and they might develop into croup, pneumonia, and sometimes bronchiolitis in an infant. Croup is a disease of the upper airway causing a very noisy cough. Sometimes we call it breathy cough, and everybody knows about what pneumonia is. Prevention, there's no vaccine for this one, but we think that about 70% of our population have an antibody against this virus. And to prevent it, personal hygiene is important. So you just do as we did during COVID-19, and that'll be enough. Treatment is very symptomatic, and you give some antipyretics such as Tylenol or acetaminophen. But I always insist that you must encourage the patient to drink more water. And how do you know he had enough water? Check the urine. It should have enough amount, and the color should be very dilute, and antibiotics are not needed for this case.
Right, I see. And Professor Chung, what can you tell us about the respiratory adenovirus? I mean, what are its symptoms and how can it be treated?
Well, adenovirus sometimes causes a very severe infection, both in children and adults. Unfortunately, we do not have a vaccine or a very effective treatment. Apart from that, there are so many viruses around us now. He mentioned about the para-influenza virus. Still, we have a quite high number of influenza virus, but luckily we have a vaccine and treatment options. But other viruses like metapneumovirus, respiratory syncytial virus, which causes a very severe disease in particularly very young children, and there are many viruses, and still they are prevalent. There is a good news for one thing, that is respiratory syncytial virus. One company is going to develop an RSV vaccine, and maybe in the market by the end of this year or next year. So having said that RSV is a very severe respiratory virus causing death in very young children, that's a very good news. But unfortunately, we do not have very effective antiviral agents, except for influenza. And COVID-19 is another respiratory virus. Luckily, we have a drug for that, but not for very young children. So we need more effort to develop vaccines and treatment options.
Right, of course. And against that backdrop, Professor Kim, how does one tell the difference between the common cold, the seasonal flu, bronchitis, as you mentioned, as well as pneumonia?
Well, common cold and seasonal flu is almost same. You cannot differentiate it by the symptom. But both of them are from virus, but the flu is by influenza virus, and common cold by hundreds of viruses, as Professor Chung mentioned, and coronavirus, para-influenza virus, rhinovirus, you name it. Flu is more intense compared to other respiratory virus, and starts more abruptly, and usually starts in the fall or winter time of the seasons. And if I compared with bronchitis, bronchus is the airway going to the lung, and upper respiratory tract infection usually have a dry cough, but bronchitis starts dry but becomes wet, like more productive. And sometimes you have bacterial bronchitis also. Usually you have some kind of fever, and some people call it as a chest cold. And if this upper respiratory tract infection becomes longer, you might develop into bronchitis also. Pneumonia is an inflammation of the lung itself, and usually it has a high fever and lasts more than 5 days of fever and cough, and shortness of breath and fatigue, poor intake. So if you develop pneumonia, usually the patient has to admit to hospital. So whenever I see the patient, I ask for the duration. If it approaches 5 days, then I think of the possibility of pneumonia and take the chest x-ray and go for the treatments.
Right, I see. Professor Chung, as you mentioned earlier, seasonal allergies are also sources of very much a concern as well as discomfort during the spring season. What can you tell us about ways to perhaps ease their symptoms?
Well, you need the treatment to ease the symptoms. But first of all, you need to find what is causing your allergy during springtime. During springtime, usually pollens from cedar tree or birch tree or alder trees are causing various allergic symptoms. It irritates the eyes and causing itchy eye, and also itchy nose and itchy throat. And it causes conjunctivitis, allergic rhinitis, and sometimes bronchial asthma. So you need to avoid the pollens. But you don't have much way to avoid any pollen. If you go out, the pollens are all over the atmosphere. So at that time, you need a mask wearing. So mask is not for COVID-19 solely, but for allergy patient, and also for preventing pollutants. So if you have any allergy symptom, you need to get a medicine, such as antihistamine, which depresses, decreases irritation of your mucosa, so it decreases itching in the nose or eyes, and etc. And also you have other treatment options, very specific treatment like anti-inflammatory treatment like the steroid or anti-allergic drug to decrease inflammatory change in your nose and eyes and bronchus. And finally, you can have immunotherapy, because such kind of antigen from pollen from trees can cause allergy. So if you put a small amount of allergens repetitively, then you have a power to prevent the allergic symptoms. So that is immunotherapy, and it is delivered by injection therapy or a sublingual medication. So other treatment options will be delivered by either oral medication or a spray type of a nasal spray or a bronchial spray, or sometimes eye drop for allergic conjunctivitis. There are various options in the prevention and treatment of allergic disease, particularly seasonal pollinosis in this season.
Right, I see. Professor Kim, pundits are also warning about cardiovascular diseases in the springtime amid the dramatic fluctuations in temperature, which is something that Professor Chung touched upon earlier as well. What is the link between temperature and cardiovascular conditions?
That's a very complex question, so my answer is going to be also very complex. Blood pressure is controlled by autonomous nervous system. Heart pumps out the blood that is needed for circulation, but the vessel tone is also very important to maintain our blood pressure. So it has a very complicated mechanism. As temperature rises and the daily temperature range increases, that triggers cardiovascular disease, and usually we have a higher number of admission due to cardiovascular disease in elderly group. There was a very big study from Japan, including more than 1 million adults, and they say that if your age is more than 75, either man or woman, they have a higher risk to have heart failure, angina, myocardial infarction, arrhythmia in that high daily temperature range. So if you have an underlying cardiovascular disease, you have to keep warm during the lower weather temperature, and you better keep cool in a higher weather temperature. And you better reduce exposure to greater changes in weather temperature to prevent cardiovascular episodes.
I see. Professor Chung, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that fine dust, which is very common here in the country this time of the year, it may also aggravate cardiovascular conditions. Could you explain this for us?
Yeah, that's correct. The fine dust, another name is SPM, suspended particulate matter. It's going to be a big problem in near future. Because the fine dust can easily get into our lung and it stays there. And it causes inflammation. It releases interleukin 6, 8, TNF-alpha, and all the very bad inflammatory materials over there. Then the materials circulate in the body, and it causes various kind of inflammation, also in vessel. And in vessel, if you have an inflammation in vessel, you have a thrombosis, clogging of a vessel, and another type of inflammation over there, and atherosclerosis will be followed by that. And also, the very fine dust get into a vessel itself, and it circulates in your body, and it also causes inflammation. If you have a very severe inflammation in the circulation system, it causes thrombus, and sometimes it causes ischemia of a target organ. So finally, it ends up with the hypertension, and ischemic heart disease, which is another name is myocardial infarction. And as Professor Kim mentioned about the body temperature, the fine dust also causes ischemic disease and also causes arrhythmia. So the fine dust is going to be a most threatening agent for our children and for our future. So we need to prevent it. And we need to prevent not only for protecting ourselves by mask wearing and ventilation and all, etc., but also by making a proper policy to reduce biomass fuel production. Diesel combustion and biomass fuel like coal power planting is most dangerous one. So we need another type of power plant, such as using a solar energy, wind power, or even nuclear power would be better for our health in terms of fine dust hazards.
Right, of course, I'd have to agree with you right there. Professor Kim, Professor Jung just mentioned ventilation. I was actually going to ask you, should people seek to ventilate their homes even when there is a fine dust warning outdoors? Because I feel compelled to close my windows shut very tightly when I hear there is a fine dust warning outside.
I think we have to think, it depends on the situation. Before I mentioned about the fine dust outside, I would start with the indoors situation. Usually, the average indoor level of those fine dust without compulsion appliance is about half of that outdoors. So we can say that it's safe to stay indoors during those fine dust periods. And what kind of indoor pollutants do we have here? We have fine particulate matters. If we cook something, if we hit something, heating system, you might have some indoors problems also. So whenever you cook something, you might have very small particles floating around. So you might have to ventilate somehow. And I cannot say exactly how we should do, but as I mentioned, it depends on the situation. So as we have our mobile phones and all the apps show that what's the situation outside. You check it, and you can open your windows briefly. And
how briefly? Are we looking at 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
Yeah, it depends. And I think you should have enough time to have a total exchange of air, at least 10 minutes maybe. But there's some research about the timing of the ventilation. We might think that the early morning might be a good time to open the windows, but just after the rush hours, and we have many dust floating around. So there's some research that maybe at noon might be better. So you open your windows, and I think many homes already have the air purifier, and you can use that one, but after cooking, you might still have to open the window because that kind of machines is not enough to clear the
air indoors.
Yeah.
I see. Professor Chung, how can members of the public here seek to reduce the harm of air pollution on their health while we wait for other industries to ease their carbon footprints?
Well, there's no definite answer for that. Whether you stay indoor or outdoor, there will always be pollution, indoor pollution, both outdoor pollution. But you have to do your best to keep your atmosphere without any kind of very harmful dust. So I like to recommend, again, the mask wearing when you are going out, particularly if you are on a very high-risk group. You have respiratory disease, underlying heart disease, diabetes, and etc. So the KF94 mask is highly recommended. KF means a Korea filter. 94 means 94% prevention of 0.4 micrometer size. Less than 0.4 micrometer size, a very fine dust. You can prevent 94%. Why you don't have any reason why you don't take a mask if you have air pollution warning sign in the morning. And he mentioned about the ventilation during the midday. I also agree with that, because not only for pollution, but also for pollens. There are more pollens in the morning rather than afternoon. So if you open a window in the morning, you can have more pollens inside your house. So that is another kind of prevention measure. One other thing I would like to recommend is keep your humidity very high. So at least 40% will be needed in order to keep your body very sound. But it's not easy to keep your humidity indoors about 40%. It's not easy at all. But at least I would recommend 30% of humidity in the rooms. If you keep those kind of humidity, you can prevent not only for air pollution, but for another kind of respiratory infection by increasing immunity, by increasing defense power in the mucosa of your bronchus and your nose.
Right.
So there are several means, but the utmost solution is make a very nice policy to keep our air clean in our territory.
Right, hopefully that will be likely in the near future then. On a light note, Professor Kim, is there any rationale behind the common belief here in the country that eating pork meat will perhaps prevent you from the harms or the possible harm of air pollution from fine dust?
Well, I don't know where it came from. I think there's no evidence for that, but I understand there was a time that people working at the coal mine, used to eat a lot of pork after digging some coal in the very dusty canals way below the earth. And I heard that some young people even thought that they might have less side effects if they have pork after COVID-19 vaccination, but there's no evidence for that. So I would rather say, as Professor Jung mentioned, hydration is very important. You better drink enough water. If you drink water when you feel thirsty, that's not good. You better drink to prevent any dehydration.
You need to keep yourself hydrated then.
Yes.
And I was wondering then, Professor Zhang, there are some people who believe that apart from pork, that having vitamin C could actually prevent you from common viruses. Is there any truth to this statement as well?
Yeah, there has been a long belief that vitamin C can prevent the cold. But as far as I know, there is no very evidence or published data for that. Because vitamin C is water soluble. If you have a lot of amount, then you can excrete through your urine and or by sweat. So there's no use of a very high amount of vitamin C. Just for preventing a cold.
I see. So in the meantime, what we can believe in, though, is to have a lot of water, then to drink water, keep yourself hydrated, and also use your face masks when the pollen rate is very high outdoors or if the fine dust rate is high. All right, Professor Zhang, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow, that is Wednesday.